Ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha. Quite some time ago, I released a video discussing how paid mods could actually be a good thing within the video game industry, and how Gabe Newell had recently been quoted as stating that he did still want to implement the paid modding system. I discussed how, if done right, it could become a whole new genre of content creation on digital distribution platforms, and how those with enough talent and creativity could even turn modding into a career instead of just a hobby. However, one thing that I did not discuss in that video was everything that is wrong with Valve's attempt at paid mods, a travesty of an affair that ended up being pulled after less than 1 week of implementation. And during that time, there were issues with mods being ripped off of websites dedicated to the modding community and posted for money without the creator's knowledge or consent. There was also things like the $99.99 horse genitals mod being posted. There were also issues with mods containing copywritten content, like one mod that turned all dragons into Thomas the Tank Engine, for example. All of this led to the release being an absolute travesty, and in spite of my still maintaining a firm belief that paid mods is a good thing, there was so much badness that outweighed any potential benefit that I agreed to produce a follow-up video to my last one discussing this topic. And here we are over a month later, but a promise is indeed a promise, so at long last we finally have the top 10 reasons why Valve should not be the ones implementing paid modding. Number 10. Copyright infringement of the game itself. Now, there were a lot of concerns about the topic of copyright infringement from a few different avenues. The first being that mods are, in actuality, copyright infringement themselves. They are content based solely upon the intellectual property of another entity and makes use of their licensed property without their consent or permission. The only reason why mods for most games exist are because the companies that own the rights to those games either are welcoming and understanding to the modding community, or deem it not worth their time or effort. Now, in addition to that, the reason why no modders have been prosecuted by the owners of the games is that, up until this point, no modder has ever charged money for the content they'd produced. If they were to do so, then that monetary gain would be clear copyright violation, and those game owners, like Bethesda, would be forced to enforce their ownership rights. This is due to the use it or lose it climate surrounding laws protecting intellectual property. Owing to the fact that mods have been free up to this point has left them in a legal gray area that most games development companies have simply left alone. However, the paid mod system implemented by Valve would take place with the full consent of the game's copyright holder, and, as was seen in the first attempt at the paid mod system, those game owners would receive a cut to the sales from those mods. Unfortunately, with the first incarnation, it was a ridiculously high percentage of every sale and was ultimately unfair to the modder, making the paid system nothing more than an additional revenue generator for Valve and Bethesda. Number 9. Copyright infringement of other properties. There are quite a few mods out there, like the Thomas the Tank Engine mod, that contains images and characters from other intellectual properties. This topic actually coincides with about 3 others, but I felt it warranted enough of a discussion to put it as a standalone item. Now, as with the previous incarnation of the paid mod system, this would allow people to post mods such as that for monetization that would be a clear violation of their copyright and could lead to prosecution and cause a fair amount of difficulty for honest modders out there that would do their best to comply with the law. Paid mods would have to contain no images from other franchises or properties in order to comply with legality, and we saw no evidence of any safeguards being put into place to protect against that from happening. Number 8. Mod theft. During the 3 abortive days that the original paid mod system was active, we saw a rash of people downloading others' mods from external sites and posting them as their own work in order to make a quick buck. This is the modder version of asset flipping taken to the extreme. It is outright theft, and once again, yet one more consideration that Valve did not anticipate when they implemented this system. These thefts of mods underscored a very large blindside or lack of forethought in the Valve planning phase of the implementation, and it has done little to instill faith in the consumer or the modder that their content or their purchases would be protected. This is actually a systemic problem with the idea of paid mods and one of the more difficult issues to overcome. Modders would need to be able to seek out the ability to copyright their own work in some fashion, which raises a severe legal question when dealing with the fact that mods are based entirely on and created for property that belongs to someone else. The only way to circumvent this would be to create some form of registration system for the modders and their content in order to verify their legal claim to their content outside of the standard copyright system. This, of course, would only help for new mods and would do absolutely nothing to inhibit this issue from occurring with pre-existing mods. Indeed, this would tie in very strongly with the aspect of curation in order to prevent this form of mod theft, and new mod registration would need to be weighed heavily in order to prevent this sort of thing from devolving into a mod scene version of Steam's Greenlight. Number 7. Support from the developers and modders. Now, one question that has never been answered to any satisfactory level was the question of support for the mods that people are paying money for. Developers do release periodic updates to their games in order to fix bugs, add additional content, and all sorts of other reasons. This has the unfortunate side effect of rendering some mods non-functional when the base files and framework that they are built off of are changed in some way. This would require the modders to be constantly updating their mods in order to ensure functionality, and is yet one more item that was never really addressed by Valve. A certain level of product assurance would be needed, and if the games companies would wish to earn money off of the back of mods created for their games, it would be extremely beneficial if modders were granted access to updates prior to general release in order to verify functionality with their mods. This, of course, would require a certain amount of partnership between the game's developers and the modders, but it realistically would not be that difficult to implement on a system like Steam. Registered modders could be granted back-end access to a general forum and site for that game's modding community and granted access to downloads for game patches and the like. However, this again was not something that was addressed by Valve in any way. Number 6. Donations versus paid. Now, a great deal of people that use the mods that are created for games are extremely uncomfortable paying for them for a variety of reasons. Primary among those reasons is the argument that mods have always been free, so they should always be free. Now, I have tilted at that particular windmill multiple times, and anything that I have to say here would be repetition of my previous video, so for that aspect, I would refer to that, which I will post a link to in the description below. However, some modders have also expressed an interest in maintaining a donation-only system, which is not a bad idea for those that would wish to take part in that. To that end, a great many people have argued against paid mods, stating that there are other avenues for people to do that, citing third-party sites such as Patreon. But it would be helpful for the modders and would typically generate them additional revenue if they were allowed to post a game under a donation-only or a pay-what-you-want tier within the Steam Workshop. The reason why this would generate them more income than from sites like Patreon is a very simple one: convenience. Through the Steam Workshop, potential customers would not need to go to another site and spend 5 or 10 minutes putting in information and going through what is deemed as a hassle. They would be able to support the modder with a simple click of the button. And in a world and industry where convenience is king, this would be highly beneficial to modders and would be far more acceptable to consumers who are at best leery considering the idea of paying for something that has culturally always been free in the past. Number 5. Percentage of funds. Of course, in the previous iteration, Bethesda and Valve were of course greedy in the extreme, leaving a mere pittance of the mod sale for the modders themselves. Valve taking 30% of every sale, while Bethesda themselves would take a whopping 45%, leaving a mere 25% for the modder. This was an insultingly low percentage and was deemed as outrageous by modders and consumers alike. The reason given were that Bethesda owned the rights to the game and as such should get the lion's share, and Valve? Well, Valve stated this was their standard percentage. However, Valve had also stated that the paid mod system would not be a big moneymaker for them, and so I will use that statement to latch onto to offer a proposed fair percentage. Valve should take a 10% cut in order to pay for maintenance of the systems. Now, some will ask, why not free? Well, Valve is a corporation. They are out to make money and aren't in the habit of doing things out of the goodness of their own hearts. A company like theirs does nothing without it being a double benefit at minimum. And as such, a 10% would still provide that by way of earning the income required for system upkeep, and by the simple fact that no other company out there is offering such a thing, which will allow Valve yet one more avenue of when gamers think of gaming, they think of Steam. That is what they want, and that thought process motivates this entire scheme to begin with. However, Bethesda's 45% was as insulting as it was asinine. The simple fact is that games like Skyrim are typically never fully patched in order to fix the game, and Bethesda's speed of abandonment for games is a little higher than other games developers. To take a cut over something they've already moved away from and will no longer be patching and supporting is greed in the extreme. Temper that percentage and it will incentivize modders to come out with more and more content, keeping your game alive and keeping people interested in the next one. A 15% cut should be more than sufficient, as this will be nothing but bonus income for them anyways. This would leave 75% for the modders themselves, which I think would be more appropriate. However, this would need to be based on a set dollar amount pay-as-you-go model. If a donation model or pay-what-you-want model were used, I would recommend instituting a minimum set amount before the game's developers or Valve see anything from the transactions, like a minimum $1 transaction or a $5 transaction, something of that nature. Number 4. Value of content versus price. One other thing that was seen as a severe issue was the amount of content contained within a mod versus the price that it was being sold at. This is something that, as a new potential fledgling industry, has not been set yet. However, one must wonder what some of these mods are worth, considering we saw sword skins being sold for $5, or the debacle with the horse testicles being sold for $100. Many of those minor mods cost as much as many indie games, and a fair amount of that was due to blatant greed coupled with Steam's $1 minimum limit of mod prices. In this, the system really needs to be allowed to be set for lower than $1. Many of these mods should have only been sold for 10 cents or a quarter to begin with, and this would have placed more realistic expectations on content. Of course, Valve would have a problem with processing sales to content creators for less than $1, so some threshold would probably have to be set, such as a minimum amount of sales on your account prior to payout, like $5 or $10. However, a realistic look at what different levels of content would be worth what, and those expectations should have been then communicated to the modders prior to the system going live. Number 3. Proper curation. Now, this also ties back to the idea of mod theft and the idea of value of content versus price, whereas the mod store would need to be heavily curated in order to prevent stolen mods or repackaged mods, which is something that Valve would be exceptionally loath to do. In the end, they would of course rely on the community for a form of self-curation and consumer curation in order to handle those issues. However, in order for even that much curation to be successful, Valve would have to be actually receptive to consumers outside of instances where hundreds or thousands of people file complaints. This would require increased manpower across the board, and given Valve's extreme hesitance to handle anything involving customer support, the greenlight system, verbally abusive developers, which yes, there have been a few, asset flippers, CSGO gambling, and a host of other issues that have cropped up in the last 2 years alone, I wouldn't put too much faith in their willingness or ability to act in their customers' best interests. Number 2. Mod integration. There is always an issue with video games when you start tacking on too many mods. So many of them make use of the same resources or have to stack over each other in a specific order to function correctly. Some mods even depend on other mods being present in order to work. This would present a severe problem with paid mods, as people will need to be provided some assurance that the item they are paying money for will indeed function as advertised and will not break other mods, or will not require another paid mod to be able to work. This is again something that was not provided in any meaningful fashion during Valve's initial attempt and is a significant issue that will need to be solved. Also, money-back guarantees will need to be offered to any and every customer for non-functioning mods, or in the event that one mod breaks another. Number 1. No QA. Now, quality assurance is something that was definitely lacking in Valve's paid mod attempt, and one that is by far and away the most commonly stated issue, and it ties into virtually every other reason on this list, which is why it has earned the top spot. Mods can cause unexpected or unforeseen issues within a video game that can result in minor glitches all the way up to complete game-breaking bugs. In order for a paid mod system to be fully effective, it would need a certain amount of QA testing to be done on each mod, or at the very least a refund system that is much more convenient than the ones we see for video games themselves. Unfortunately, as was stated before, Valve has shown their extreme reticence in taking up the mantle that such work would entail. Indeed, if not for a system that can be automated or pawned off onto their own consumers, Valve is likely to do very little, if anything at all. So that has been the top 10 reasons that I am aware of for Valve's attempt at paid mods to ultimately be doomed to fail, and my apologies for some of them being longer than others. In spite of what Gabe Newell might want to accomplish with paid mods, each and every one of the reasons listed here would be enough to derail that project on their own. Combine them all together, and we are presented with a significant issue that has to be overcome in order for paid mods to succeed. Unfortunately, given Valve's history, I think it's safe to say that Valve is simply not up to the task, as they are in a position of being unwilling in some instances and incapable in others to be able to change sufficiently to work these issues out. There is also the issue that was not listed here that is very much customer perception. Case in point, if someone were to come to consumers 20 years ago and introduce the idea of Day 1 DLC, pre-order bonuses, and season passes, they would be laughed into obscurity. Now, through a sequence of slow pushes that took literally years for the AAA companies to accomplish, such things are considered still despicable, but commonplace. It is very much an acceptance under objection in most instances, and those companies still make a great deal of money off of those scenarios. Paid mods is another such instance of drastic change, and it is one that Valve very much tried to dive into the deep end of the pool with. Such drastic change will almost always be met with seemingly insurmountable problems and community backlash. But I don't think the idea of paid mods should outright die. I still believe that it is a fantastic idea and one that could incentivize all kinds of new and wonderful content. Everything I said in regards to that in my previous video I still hold true, but is Valve the right company to do it? Yeah, possibly. Not likely, but possibly. They are the ones with the infrastructure to do it. Indeed, it's already been built, just turned off for the time being. And I think that to start off with, a donate or pay what you want model without a minimum price required would be a necessary first step. Let people toe the waters and solve the issues that arise before moving on to a larger and more robust system, because as we all know, Rome wasn't built in a day. Valve attempted to sprint to the finish line when I think a leisurely stroll would have been far more appropriate. Indeed, a smaller system with an initial effort by Valve to reach out to a great many of the modding sites to allow the legitimate mod creators a chance to at least register their mods in order to prevent someone else from profiting off of them would go a long way. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. Would a donation or pay what you want system within Steam with an easy refund capability be something more acceptable, as long as modders were able to decide for themselves if they even wanted their mod to be monetized? Also, please remember to like and share, and if you're new to the channel, I'm sure the subscribe button is down there somewhere. I think it might still work. Best give it a click just to make sure. Links to my Patreon, Twitter, Reddit, and Facebook and everything else are in the description down below. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha, and thanks for watching.